I never thought I'd raise another child at 63. But life doesn't ask permission before it changes everything. My name is Vivian, and this is the story of how my grandson saved us both with nothing but truth and a mind that saw the world differently than anyone else. It started 11 years ago on a Tuesday morning. I was finishing my coffee when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, my daughter Rachel stood there holding the hand of a 5-year-old boy who was rocking back and forth, his hands pressed hard against his ears. "Mom, this is Ethan. He's yours now." Before I could respond, she was gone. Just like that. No explanation, no phone number, no forwarding address. Just a little boy with one backpack and eyes that wouldn't meet mine. Ethan didn't speak. He didn't cry. He just stood in my doorway, rocking and humming a tune I didn't recognize. I had been a teacher for 37 years, but I had never encountered anything quite like this. I didn't know then that my grandson was autistic. I didn't know what autism even really meant. Those first weeks were the hardest of my life. Ethan would scream if I touched him without warning. He would only eat 3 specific foods. He needed the same routine every single day or he'd shut down completely. I learned quickly that his world needed predictability. Consistency over comfort. Structure over spontaneity. I bought books. I called specialists. I learned about sensory overload, about stimming, about the way his brain processed information differently. Not worse, just different. I learned that when he lined up his toy cars in perfect color gradients that were invisible to my eyes, he wasn't being obsessive. He was finding order in chaos. Slowly, Ethan began to trust me. Not with words. He still didn't speak much. But with small gestures. He'd let me sit near him. He'd eat breakfast at the table with me. He'd let me drive him to therapy without covering his ears the whole way. By the time he was 7, he had a vocabulary. By 8, he could hold short conversations. By 9, he was reading at a high school level. But it was what he did with information that fascinated me most. Ethan noticed everything. He could tell when a receipt was calculated wrong. He spotted errors in my checkbook that I'd missed for months. He could look at a person's face and tell me exactly what emotion they were feeling, even when they tried to hide it. He analyzed the world like a detective analyzing evidence. When he was 10, I found him scanning all my old documents into my computer. Bills, letters, school records, everything. I asked him why. "To keep them safe," he said. "Paper gets lost. Digital lasts." I didn't think much of it then. I just thought he liked organizing. I had no idea what he was really building. By age 12, Ethan had taught himself to code. He spent hours writing programs I didn't understand. When I asked what he was working on, he'd say, "A way to prove things are real." At 13, he showed me his first working prototype. It was software that could verify whether a document had been altered. He explained it using terms I barely grasped, something about digital fingerprints and verification chains and timestamps that couldn't be faked. "Why do you need this?" I asked. He looked at me with those serious eyes. "Because people lie." I hugged him then, even though he stiffened. Because I understood. He'd been abandoned by his mother. Trust had been broken before he could even understand what trust meant. So he built a system that made truth visible. By 15, his software was extraordinary. He'd refined it, expanded it, turned it into something that major companies wanted. Document verification for legal firms, hospitals, government agencies. Places where truth mattered. Then came the deal. A tech company offered him $3.2 million for his system. At 16 years old, my grandson became a millionaire. The local news covered it. They called him a prodigy, a genius, an inspiration. Ethan didn't like the attention. He just nodded politely during interviews and went back to his work. But I was so proud I could barely breathe. This boy who couldn't speak at 5 had built something that would change industries. 2 weeks after the sale went public, the doorbell rang again. I thought it was another reporter. But when I opened the door, my breath caught in my throat. Rachel, my daughter, standing there after 11 years of absolute silence. She looked polished, professional, like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Next to her stood a man in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase. "Hello, Mom," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I think it's time we talked about Ethan." My hands started shaking. I wanted to slam the door. I wanted to scream. But before I could do anything, Ethan appeared behind me. He looked at his mother, the woman who'd abandoned him, and his expression didn't change at all. "Let her in, Grandma," he said quietly. "Let her talk." I didn't understand why he was so calm. My heart was pounding. Every instinct told me this was wrong. But I trusted Ethan. So I stepped aside. Rachel and her lawyer walked into my living room like they owned it. They sat down without being invited. The lawyer opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents at least 2 inches thick. "Ms. Harrison," he began, "my client has been trying to reach you for years regarding custody and financial arrangements for her son. These documents show a consistent pattern of communication, financial support, and parental involvement that your mother has unfortunately ignored." I stared at him. "That's a lie. She hasn't contacted us once in 11 years. Rachel's face shifted into an expression of wounded sadness. "Mom, I know you're angry, but that's simply not true. I've sent letters, money, birthday cards. I've called. You never responded. I thought maybe you wanted space, but now that Ethan's successful, I can't stay silent anymore. He's my son." The lawyer slid documents across my coffee table. Custody agreements, visitation schedules, bank statements showing monthly deposits, letters with dates spanning years. All of it looked official, notarized, legal. "This is impossible," I whispered. "None of this exists. She abandoned him." "Ms. Harrison, I understand this is emotional, but documentation doesn't lie. My client has maintained legal parental rights and financial responsibility. Given Ethan's recent financial success, we need to establish proper guardianship arrangements. Currently, you've been operating without legal custody. That needs to be corrected." My stomach dropped. Legal custody. I'd never formally adopted Ethan. Rachel had simply left him. I'd assumed her abandonment meant I had rights by default. But legally, she was still his mother. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Rachel leaned forward, her expression softening into something that might have looked like concern to someone who didn't know her. "I want what's best for Ethan. I want to be part of his life again. And I want to make sure his finances are properly managed. He's 16. He needs guidance." Translation: she wanted control of his money. I looked at Ethan. He sat perfectly still, watching his mother like she was a specimen under glass. No emotion. No reaction. Just observation. "Ethan," I said carefully, "do you remember your mother?" "Yes." "Do you want her involved in your life?" He paused for exactly 3 seconds. "I want to hear what she has to say." Rachel's face brightened. "Sweetheart, I know I made mistakes. I was young and scared. But I never stopped thinking about you. I never stopped trying. Your grandmother made it difficult, but I kept trying. And now I want to make things right." The lawyer began explaining legal procedures. Court dates, custody evaluations, financial audits. My head spun with terminology I didn't understand. All I knew was that I might lose Ethan. After 11 years of raising him, of learning his world, of loving him when no one else would, I might lose him to the woman who'd thrown him away. After they left, I collapsed onto the couch and cried. Ethan sat beside me, not touching but present. "She's lying," I said between sobs. "All of it. Every document. Every word." "I know. Then why did you let her in? Why did you say you wanted to hear what she had to say?" He looked at me then, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that might have been a smile. Because I needed to see what she brought. I didn't understand. Not yet. The next morning, I called a lawyer. A family law attorney named Patricia Chun who came highly recommended. I explained everything. The abandonment. The sudden return. The documents that couldn't possibly be real. Patricia listened carefully, took notes, and then said the words I was dreading. "Vivian, without counter-evidence, this will be very difficult. She has documentation. You have testimony. In family court, documentation typically wins. Do you have anything that proves she wasn't involved? Old calendars, receipts, phone records?" "I have some things. School records showing I was the only contact. Therapy intake forms listing me as guardian. But nothing that specifically proves she didn't send money or letters. Then we'll need to build a timeline. Show the court what really happened. But I'll be honest, this is an uphill battle. And if she pushes for financial guardianship, given that she's the biological parent with documented involvement, a judge might grant it." I felt sick. So she could take his money? She could gain legal authority over his financial decisions until he's 18. Yes. I went home devastated. But Ethan seemed unconcerned. He spent that entire evening in his room, typing away at his computer like nothing had changed. "Ethan," I said, knocking gently on his doorframe, "aren't you worried?" "No." "Why not?" He didn't look up from his screen. "Because I've been documenting everything since I was 10. Documenting what? The truth. I wanted to ask more, but he was deep in concentration, and I'd learned long ago not to interrupt when he was focused. So I let him work. The weeks before the first court hearing were agony. Rachel's lawyer filed motion after motion. They requested financial records. They demanded custody evaluations. They painted me as an overprotective grandmother who'd isolated a child from his mother. Patricia did her best to counter, but we were drowning in paperwork. Rachel's documentation was pristine. Every letter had a date. Every bank statement showed deposits. Every piece of evidence told a consistent story of a mother who'd tried to stay involved. Except it was all fake. I knew it was fake, but I couldn't prove it. The preliminary hearing arrived. We sat in family court while Rachel's lawyer presented his case with devastating precision. He had timelines. He had financial records. He had notarized letters. He made Rachel sound like a devoted mother who'd been unfairly shut out. When Patricia cross-examined, she poked holes where she could. Can you provide proof these letters were actually mailed and received? We have postal receipts for several. Can you explain why there's no record of phone calls in Ms. Harrison's phone records? My client called from various numbers and often got no answer. Every answer had a counter. Every question had documentation. By the end of the hearing, the judge looked sympathetic toward Rachel. Ms. Morgan, the judge said, addressing Rachel, it appears you've made genuine efforts to maintain contact with your son. Ms. Harrison, she turned to me, while I don't doubt your love for your grandson, this court must consider the rights of biological parents. We'll reconvene in 30 days for a full custody hearing. In the meantime, I'm ordering supervised visitation between Ethan and his mother. I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. Supervised visitation. In 30 days, we'd be back here, and I might lose everything. Lose him. Outside the courtroom, Rachel approached us with that same false warmth. I hope we can make this transition smooth, Mom. For Ethan's sake. I wanted to spit in her face. Instead, I turned away, holding Ethan's hand. He squeezed back, a rare gesture of physical comfort. In the car, I broke down again. I'm so sorry. I don't know how to fight this. She's going to win. Ethan's voice was steady. No, she's not. How can you be so sure? Because her documents are forgeries. And I can prove it. I looked at him through my tears. What do you mean? The system I built. It doesn't just verify documents going forward. It can analyze old documents too. Check their metadata, their digital fingerprints, their creation dates, everything. So you're saying you can prove her documents are fake? I already have. My heart started pounding. Since when? Since the day she came to the house. I scanned everything she showed us while her lawyer was talking. I've been analyzing it ever since. Every document she submitted was created within the last 2 months. None of them are from the years she claims. The metadata doesn't lie. Hope, terrifying and fragile, flickered in my chest. Can you show this in court? Yes. But we need to wait until the final hearing. If we reveal it now, she'll know we have proof and might run. We need her to commit fully to her story first. Let her present everything. Then I'll dismantle it. I stared at my grandson, this 16-year-old boy who thought like a chess player, and realized he'd been 3 steps ahead from the very beginning. He'd let Rachel in not because he was naive, but because he needed to see what weapons she'd bring to the fight. And then he'd quietly built the counter-strategy that would destroy her. You've been planning this the whole time. Since I was 12, he said simply. I knew she'd come back eventually. People like her always do when there's something to gain. So I made sure I'd be ready. The supervised visitations began the following week. Every Saturday, Rachel would spend 2 hours with Ethan at a family center while a social worker observed. I wasn't allowed in the room, so I sat in the waiting area, my stomach in knots. Ethan reported that Rachel tried hard during those visits. She brought gifts. She talked about their future together. She apologized repeatedly for past mistakes. She played the role of reformed, loving mother with Academy Award precision. Does any of it seem real to you? I asked after the 3rd visit. No. She asks questions about my money constantly. About the software. About what other projects I'm working on. She doesn't ask about my therapy, my routines, my interests. She asks about assets.
It confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't about reconnection. This was about control. About $3.2 million that Rachel believed she deserved access to. Patricia worked tirelessly to build our case, but she remained pessimistic. Her documentation is too clean, Vivian. Unless we can definitively prove fraud, which is nearly impossible with paper trails this detailed. We're fighting an uphill battle. I need you to prepare for the possibility that the judge grants her partial custody and financial guardianship. We have proof, I said carefully. Ethan has been working on something. Patricia's eyes sharpened. What kind of proof? I explained as best I could. The document verification system. The metadata analysis. The ability to prove creation dates regardless of what the paperwork claimed. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. That could work. But we'd need expert testimony to support it. We'd need to present it in a way the judge understands. And we'd need Ethan willing to testify. He's willing. Vivian, he's 16 and autistic. The opposing counsel will try to discredit him. They'll argue he doesn't understand what he's analyzing. They'll make it seem like a teenager's computer hobby, not legitimate forensic evidence. Then we make it legitimate. We bring in experts who can verify his methodology. We show that his system has already been purchased by major corporations for exactly this purpose. We prove that his analysis is more accurate than human review. Patricia smiled for the first time in weeks. That might actually work. Let me talk to Ethan. I need to understand exactly what he's built. The meeting between Patricia and Ethan lasted 4 hours. I watched through the conference room window as my grandson, usually so uncomfortable with prolonged social interaction, explained his system with perfect clarity. He showed her the code, the verification chains, the metadata extraction, the cross-referencing algorithms. When they finally emerged, Patricia looked stunned. Vivian, what he's built is revolutionary. I've handled hundreds of fraud cases, and I've never seen analysis this precise. If we can present this properly, we don't just win custody. We destroy Rachel's case so completely that she'll face criminal charges. The final hearing was scheduled for exactly 30 days after the preliminary. In that time, Patricia brought in 2 expert witnesses, a digital forensic specialist and a document authentication expert. Both reviewed Ethan's work. Both confirmed its validity. Both agreed to testify. Rachel, meanwhile, grew bolder. She filed additional motions requesting immediate partial custody. She gave interviews to local news, painting herself as a mother fighting to reunite with her son. She played the victim beautifully. The night before the final hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at old photos of Ethan. The silent 5-year-old who'd arrived on my doorstep. The careful 7-year-old who'd learned to trust me. The brilliant teenager who'd turned pain into purpose. Ethan found me there at 2 a.m. You should rest. I can't. What if something goes wrong tomorrow? What if the judge doesn't believe you? What if? Grandma. He rarely called me that out loud. I've checked everything 17 times. Her documents are provably fraudulent. The evidence is irrefutable. She will lose. How can you be so certain? Because I built my system to be certain. That's its entire purpose. To make truth visible even when everyone wants to hide it. I reached for his hand. He let me take it. When did you get so wise? I had a good teacher. The courtroom was packed. News of the case had spread. Autistic teen prodigy versus returning mother. The media loved the drama. I hated every second of attention, but Ethan seemed immune to it. He sat calmly beside Patricia, his laptop bag at his feet, waiting. Rachel's lawyer began with an opening statement that was masterful manipulation. He spoke of a young mother overwhelmed by an autistic child she didn't understand. He described her guilt, her growth, her years of attempting reconciliation. He painted Vivian as well-meaning but possessive, unable to let go. Then came the documentation parade. Letter after letter, each with precise dates. Bank statements showing monthly deposits of $200, every single month for 11 years. Postal receipts. Notarized affidavits. A timeline so detailed it seemed impossible to fabricate. Rachel herself testified with tears in her eyes. I was 23 when Ethan was born. I didn't know how to handle his needs. I thought my mother, a trained teacher, could help him better than I could. I never meant to abandon him. I stayed in contact. I sent money every month from my own paycheck, even when I was struggling. I wrote letters he never received. I called numbers that were never answered. And now, seeing him succeed, I'm so proud. I just want to be part of his life again. It was a performance worthy of an award. Several people in the gallery were visibly moved. Even the judge looked sympathetic. Patricia cross-examined carefully. Ms. Morgan, can you describe Ethan's therapeutic routine? Rachel hesitated. I believe he sees a therapist weekly. What kind of therapy? I'm not sure of the specific type. Can you name his therapist? I don't have that information currently. What are his dietary restrictions? Another pause. I know he's particular about food. Can you name 3 foods he'll consistently eat? I would need to ask him. What are his sensory triggers? Loud noises, I think. Patricia's tone remained neutral. For someone who claims 11 years of consistent involvement, you seem to know very little about your son's daily life. Rachel's lawyer objected. Your Honor, my client has been denied access. It's unreasonable to expect detailed knowledge when visitation has been prevented. The judge sustained the objection. Patricia sat down, but she'd made her point. Rachel knew facts. She didn't know Ethan. Then came our turn. Patricia called me to the stand first. I testified about the abandonment, the years of therapy, the school meetings Rachel never attended, the medical emergencies she never knew about, the birthdays she never acknowledged. Rachel's lawyer cross-examined aggressively. Ms. Harrison, did you make any effort to contact my client after she left Ethan in your care? No, because she disappeared completely. Did you hire an investigator? File a missing person report. Contact other family members? No, I focused on caring for Ethan. So you made no attempt to facilitate a relationship between mother and son? She abandoned him. I protected him. Or did you see an opportunity to raise a second child and deliberately cut the biological mother out? I wanted to scream. Instead, I said quietly, I saw a terrified little boy who needed stability. That's what I gave him. After my testimony, Patricia called her expert witnesses. The digital forensic specialist explained metadata, digital fingerprints, creation timestamps. He testified that documents can be backdated on paper but not in their underlying digital properties. The document authentication expert discussed ink analysis, paper aging, and printing methods. He explained that modern laser printers leave microscopic identifiers that can reveal when and where something was printed.
Both were credible. Both were clear. But both were also theoretical. They explained what was possible. They hadn't yet examined Rachel's specific documents. Rachel's lawyer made that exact point in his cross-examination. Sir, you've testified about general principles. Have you personally analyzed any of the documents my client submitted? No, I have not. So you cannot testify to their authenticity or lack thereof? Not specifically, no. It was a setback. The experts established that fraud was detectable, but they hadn't detected it yet. We needed the final witness. We needed Ethan. Patricia called him to the stand. He walked up calmly, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. He sat down, adjusted the microphone, and waited. Ethan, Patricia began gently, can you explain what you do? I create systems for document verification. My software analyzes digital and scanned documents to determine authenticity, detect alterations, and establish creation timelines. How does it work? For the next 10 minutes, Ethan explained his system in terms a courtroom could understand. He described digital fingerprints, metadata extraction, cross-referencing algorithms, and verification chains. He explained how every digital file contains hidden information about its creation, modification, and handling. The judge listened intently. Rachel's lawyer took notes with increasing concern. Ethan, Patricia continued, on the day your mother visited your home with her attorney, did you analyze the documents they presented? Yes. How? I photographed them with my phone while they were talking. High resolution. Then I ran them through my verification system that evening. What did you find? Every document they presented was created within a 60-day window prior to their visit. None of the documents are from the dates they claim. The courtroom erupted in whispers. The judge banged her gavel. Rachel's face went pale. Rachel's lawyer shot to his feet. Objection. This is speculation based on a teenager's unverified software. There's no chain of custody, no proper forensic analysis, no. The judge held up her hand. I'll allow the testimony. Continue, Ms. Chun. Patricia approached the bench with a tablet. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like Ethan to demonstrate his findings. The judge nodded. A bailiff set up a screen connected to Ethan's laptop. The courtroom watched as Ethan methodically pulled up document after document from Rachel's submissions. For each one, he showed the claimed date on the paper, the actual creation date in the file metadata, the printer identification code embedded in the print, the digital signature showing when it was scanned or generated. One by one, he dismantled Rachel's entire case. A letter supposedly written in 2014 was actually created 6 weeks ago. A bank statement supposedly from 2016 was generated on the same computer, same printer, same day as all the others. Postal receipts that should have been 11 years old showed paper composition consistent with current production. The detail was devastating. Ethan's presentation wasn't emotional or accusatory. It was simply factual. Each piece of evidence displayed on the screen with timestamp data, printer forensics, and file creation information that couldn't be explained away. This letter, Ethan said, highlighting one of Rachel's supposed communications from 2015, claims to have been written 9 years ago. However, the metadata shows it was created on March 14th of this year using Microsoft Word version 16.8, which didn't exist in 2015. The printer identification code matches a Canon model released in 2022. The paper's optical brightener signature indicates manufacturing within the last 6 months. Rachel's lawyer tried to interrupt. Your Honor, this is highly technical testimony from a minor without proper credentials. The court has already heard from 2 experts who validated the methodology, the judge said sharply. I want to hear what this young man found. Continue, Ethan. Ethan pulled up a bank statement next. This statement supposedly shows monthly deposits of $200 from my mother's account to my grandmother's account over 11 years. However, the document formatting matches current Wells Fargo templates, not historical ones. More significantly, the transaction reference numbers follow a sequential pattern that didn't exist in their system until 2019. I contacted Wells Fargo's fraud department, and they confirmed these transaction numbers are fictitious. He had contacted the bank. He'd verified every detail. This wasn't a teenager guessing. This was airtight forensic work. The postal receipts, he continued, show tracking numbers that don't match USPS format for the years claimed. The barcode structure changed in 2017. These receipts use the current format, meaning they cannot have been generated before 2017, yet several claim to be from 2012 through 2016. Rachel was crying now, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of panic. Her lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. Ethan pulled up a comparison chart. This is my grandmother's actual phone records from the past 11 years, obtained through our carrier. 0 incoming calls from any number associated with my mother. These are the actual bank statements from my grandmother's account. 0 deposits from any source connected to my mother. These are my school records listing emergency contacts. Only my grandmother appears. These are therapy intake forms spanning 10 years. Only my grandmother is listed as guardian and contact. He overlaid the fake documents with the real ones. The discrepancies were undeniable. Every document my mother submitted was fabricated within 2 months of her initial visit to our home. The fabrication occurred immediately after news coverage of my software sale became public. The timing is not coincidental. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Harrison, do you have evidence of when your mother became aware of your financial success? Yes, Your Honor. Ethan pulled up social media records. My mother's Facebook account shows she shared the news article about my software sale on her page 11 days before she appeared at our door. Her comment on the article said, "So proud of my boy." It was her first public mention of me in 11 years. Prior to that, her social media contains no references to having a son. It was an execution. Not of a person, but of a lie. Ethan systematically destroyed every piece of Rachel's case with evidence so comprehensive that denial became impossible. Patricia let the silence hang for a moment before asking her final question. Ethan, why did you build this system? Because I needed to be able to prove what was true when people told me things that felt wrong. I needed certainty in a world that often doesn't make sense to me. And I needed to be able to protect my grandmother, who protected me when no one else would. Rachel's lawyer attempted cross-examination, but there was nothing left to attack. Mr. Harrison, isn't it possible your system made errors? No. The methodology has been independently verified by the experts who testified earlier. Additionally, my system has been implemented by 6 major corporations and 3 government agencies for document authentication. Its accuracy rate is 99.7%, which is higher than human expert analysis. You're 16 years old. How can this court trust? Age doesn't determine accuracy. Evidence does. I've presented verifiable data. You've presented fabricated documents. The truth isn't subjective. The lawyer sat down. There was nothing more to say. The judge called a 15-minute recess. When we reconvened, her expression was severe. Ms. Morgan, I've reviewed the evidence presented by your son. The discrepancies between your submitted documents and his forensic analysis are not minor. They're fundamental. These documents appear to be wholesale fabrications. Rachel's lawyer stood. Your Honor, perhaps there's been a misunderstanding in how the documents were prepared for submission. Counselor, there's no misunderstanding. Your client presented forged evidence to this court. That's not a misunderstanding. That's perjury and fraud. Rachel stood suddenly, her voice desperate. Please, I just wanted to be part of his life. I made mistakes, yes, but I'm still his mother. You abandoned your 5-year-old autistic son on a doorstep and disappeared for 11 years, the judge said coldly. You made no genuine effort at contact. And when your son achieved success, you manufactured an elaborate fraud to gain control of his finances. That's not motherhood. That's exploitation. The judge looked at me. Ms. Harrison, this court recognizes that you've raised Ethan with extraordinary dedication. You've provided stability, therapy, education, and love to a child with complex needs. You did this without legal obligation, without financial support, and without recognition. She turned back to Rachel. Ms. Morgan, I'm denying your petition for custody in its entirety. Full legal custody is awarded to Vivian Harrison. Furthermore, I'm referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of perjury, fraud, and attempted financial exploitation of a minor. Bailiff, please provide Ms. Morgan's information to the DA. Rachel collapsed into her chair, sobbing. Her lawyer looked ill. The courtroom buzzed with shocked whispers. The judge wasn't finished. I'm also issuing a restraining order. Ms. Morgan, you are prohibited from contacting Ethan or Ms. Harrison for a period of 5 years minimum. Any attempt at contact will result in immediate arrest. Do you understand? Rachel nodded, unable to speak. This hearing is concluded. The gavel came down with finality. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed us. Patricia handled them while I held Ethan's hand and walked to the car. Once we were inside, doors closed, the world muted. I finally let myself breathe. You did it, I whispered. You saved us. We saved us, he corrected. You saved me first. I drove home in a daze. 11 years of fear, of wondering if Rachel would return, of worrying that I'd lose the boy I'd raised. It was over. Not just resolved, but decisively finished. That evening, Ethan worked quietly in his room as always. I made dinner, his favorite meal, the same one I'd learned to make perfectly 11 years ago when consistency became our lifeline. Grilled cheese with the crusts cut off, tomato soup at exactly 120 degrees, apple slices arranged in a specific pattern. Routines that once felt restrictive now felt like love made visible. We ate in comfortable silence. Ethan didn't need conversation to feel connected. Presence was enough. But tonight I needed words. Can I ask you something? I said carefully. He nodded, taking a precise bite of his sandwich. When did you know she'd come back? He thought for exactly 4 seconds, which meant he was choosing his words deliberately. I didn't know she'd come back. I calculated probability. She abandoned me when I was a burden. Statistically, people who abandon children for convenience often return when those children become assets. When my software sold, the probability approached 93%. So you prepared for years for something you only thought was likely? Preparation isn't wasted if it prevents catastrophe. The worst outcome wasn't that I prepared unnecessarily. The worst outcome was being unprepared when it happened. I thought about that. Most people would call it paranoia. But Ethan didn't think in neurotypical patterns. He thought in data, in probabilities, in preventative systems. And he'd been right. How did you learn to do all of this? I asked. The coding, the forensics, the legal understanding? Internet. Libraries. I read documentation for document authentication systems used by governments. I studied legal precedents for fraud cases. I learned programming languages through online courses. Information is accessible if you know how to find it. Most 16-year-olds don't teach themselves forensic document analysis. Most 16-year-olds don't need to prove their existence matters to the person who gave birth to them. The pain in that statement, delivered without emotion, broke my heart. I reached across the table and touched his hand. He didn't pull away. Your existence has always mattered, I said. Every single day. Not because of what you can do or create or achieve. Just because you're you. He looked at our hands, his expression unreadable. I know. That's why I documented everything. Not just to protect us legally, but to preserve proof that someone chose me. That even when I couldn't express gratitude or affection properly, I was loved. I wanted evidence that I wasn't a burden. I was wanted. Tears streamed down my face. This boy who struggled with emotional expression had just articulated the deepest truth of our relationship. He'd spent years building a system to prove love was real. You were always wanted, I whispered. Every difficult day. Every meltdown. Every therapy session. Every moment you couldn't tell me what you needed. I wanted all of it, because I wanted you. We sat there, hands touching across the table, and something shifted. Not dramatically. Ethan didn't suddenly become emotionally expressive. But there was an understanding between us that didn't need words. The next few weeks brought consequences for Rachel. The district attorney filed criminal charges. Perjury, fraud, attempted exploitation of a minor, forgery. Her lawyer negotiated a plea deal to avoid trial. Rachel pled guilty to reduced charges and received 2 years probation, 300 hours of community service, and mandatory restitution for court costs. Part of her community service was assigned to an autism support center. The judge specifically required it. Perhaps, the judge had said during sentencing, you'll learn about the child you abandoned by helping other families who actually value their autistic children. I thought it was pointless. Rachel wouldn't change. But Ethan surprised me by saying, it's appropriate. She'll either learn empathy or confirm she's incapable of it. Either outcome provides closure. Months passed. Life settled into new rhythms. Ethan started working on his next project, a system for helping nonverbal autistic individuals communicate through pattern recognition. He hired a small team, including 2 adults on the spectrum who understood the community they were serving. He also established a scholarship fund for autistic students pursuing technology degrees. People told me I couldn't do complex work because of how my brain functions, he explained. I want to fund others who've been told the same lie. I watched him build something bigger than software. He was building legacy, purpose, proof that different minds weren't broken, just different. One evening, 6 months after the trial, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Hello, Ms. Harrison, this is Caroline Webb. I'm the director of the Riverside Autism Center, where Rachel Morgan is completing community service. I'm calling because I thought you should know something. My stomach tightened. Is there a problem? No, actually. The opposite. Rachel's been working with our nonverbal children, and something's changed. She comes early. Stays late. She's learning sign language, learning communication tools. She cries sometimes when the children make breakthroughs. I think being here is affecting her. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted Rachel to suffer forever. But another part, the part that had spent a lifetime teaching children, wondered if people could change. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because she asked me to. She wants you to know she's not trying to contact you or Ethan. She's respecting the restraining order completely. But she wanted you to know that she's learning what she should have learned 17 years ago. She's not asking for forgiveness. She just wanted you to know she understands now what she destroyed. After I hung up, I told Ethan about the call. He processed the information silently. Does it change anything for you? I asked. No. Her growth, if genuine, doesn't erase her choices. But it's data. It suggests people can learn, even when learning comes too late to repair what they broke. Do you think you'll ever want contact with her? I don't know. Perhaps when I'm older and her presence can't threaten my stability. Perhaps never. I don't feel obligated to forgive just because someone regrets their actions. That's fair, I said. Forgiveness isn't owed. It's chosen. More time passed. Ethan turned 17. His communication system launched successfully, helping hundreds of nonverbal individuals express themselves with unprecedented clarity. News outlets called him an inspiration. He called it solving a problem that shouldn't have existed. On his 17th birthday, we had a small celebration. Just us, his therapist, and 2 friends from his team. Ethan didn't like crowds or surprises, so we kept it simple. Cake he actually liked. Presents that were practical. No singing. After everyone left, Ethan handed me an envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "Open it." Inside was a legal document. Adoption papers. Completed and ready for filing. "I know I'm almost an adult," Ethan said. "But I wanted it official. I wanted legal documentation that you're my parent. Not because of biology. Because of choice." I couldn't speak. I just held the papers and cried while Ethan sat beside me, patient and present. We filed the papers the following week. The judge who'd handled our custody case personally approved the adoption. "It's rare I see this kind of dedication," she said. "This should have been formalized years ago, but I'm honored to make it official now." The day the adoption was finalized, I became legally what I'd always been in reality, Ethan's mother. Not grandmother. Mother. He changed his emergency contacts that same day. Updated his legal documents. Modified his business registration. Every place his name appeared, he added mine as parent. Not guardian. Parent. Does it feel different? I asked him that evening. Yes. It feels accurate now. As Ethan's 18th birthday approached, his business grew exponentially. His verification system was now used by hospitals, law firms, government agencies, and corporations worldwide. His communication system had been implemented in school districts across 12 states. He'd become, almost accidentally, a voice for autistic innovation. He was invited to speak at conferences. He declined most, but accepted a few when they focused on autistic adults in technology rather than inspiration narratives. "I'm not inspiration," he said in one rare interview. "I'm a person who solved problems. Autistic people don't exist to inspire neurotypical people. We exist to live our lives with the same validity as anyone else." The interviewer asked about Rachel. Ethan's answer was simple. "She's irrelevant to my story. The relevant person is the one who stayed." That clip went viral. Millions of views. Thousands of comments from people raised by grandparents, by adoptive parents, by anyone who chose them when biology didn't. Ethan didn't care about the attention, but I read every comment. Story after story of chosen family mattering more than blood. One comment stood out. "My grandmother raised me too. She died before I could tell her she saved my life. Tell yours while you can." I showed it to Ethan. He read it carefully, then looked at me. "You know, right? That you saved my life." "You saved mine too," I said. I'd retired. I thought my purpose was finished. Then you arrived and gave me a reason to keep going. "Symbiotic relationship," he said, and I laughed because that was the most Ethan way to describe love. The restraining order still had 4 years remaining, but Rachel never tried to violate it. According to Caroline at the Autism Center, Rachel continued volunteering even after her community service hours were complete. She'd become a consistent presence in the lives of autistic children whose parents were struggling. She tells them what she did, Caroline told me during one of our occasional check-in calls. She tells them about Ethan, about abandoning him, about the damage she caused. She tells them not to make her mistakes. Some parents appreciate it. Others think she's too harsh on herself. But she's helping people. I didn't know what to do with that information. Part of me wanted Rachel to suffer forever. But another part, the educator part, recognized growth when I saw evidence of it. "Does she ask about him?" I said, hating that I was curious. "Never. She respects the boundary completely. But I know she follows his work." She cried when his communication system won that innovation award. Not proud crying. Grieving crying. Like she finally understood what she lost. After I hung up, I wondered if I should tell Ethan. I decided yes. He deserved all information, not filtered information. His response was characteristically analytical. "Her reformation doesn't obligate me to relationship. But it's statistically notable. Most people who commit exploitation don't develop genuine empathy afterward. It suggests her regret may be authentic rather than performative. Does that matter to you?" "Only as data. It doesn't change history. But it's interesting." "Interesting. That was Ethan's way of saying something affected him without being ready to articulate how. As months became a year, then 2, life found its rhythm. Ethan turned 19. His companies employed 47 people, 15 of whom were autistic adults who'd struggled to find work elsewhere. He'd created an environment where different communication styles weren't just accepted but optimized for. I watched him in meetings sometimes, conducting business with the same systematic precision he applied to everything. He'd learned to navigate neurotypical business expectations while refusing to mask his autistic traits. He stymied during presentations. He requested written agendas. He used direct communication that sometimes startled people with its honesty. And he succeeded. Not despite being autistic, but as an autistic person who'd built systems around his strengths rather than trying to fix his differences. One of his employees, a young woman named Maya who was also autistic, told me once, "Working for Ethan is the first time I haven't felt broken. He doesn't treat our autism like something to overcome. He treats it like an operating system with different features." That changes everything. That perspective, that revolutionary idea that different wasn't defective, became the foundation of Ethan's companies. And it changed lives. Meanwhile, my life expanded too. I'd retired from teaching years ago, but Ethan hired me as a consultant for his communication system. "You understand education," he said. "Help me make this work in schools." So I worked with teachers, with school districts, with families. I helped them understand that the goal wasn't to make autistic children act neurotypical. The goal was to give every child tools to express themselves in ways that worked for their minds. It was the most fulfilling work I'd ever done. At 74 years old, I was still teaching, still learning, still making a difference. One evening, 3 years after the trial, Ethan came home with an unusual expression. Not upset, but thoughtful. "I saw Rachel today," he said. My heart stopped. "What? How?" "The restraining order. It expired last month. We were at the same conference on autism advocacy. She was presenting about supporting parents of newly diagnosed children. I was presenting on employment for autistic adults. We saw each other across the room. Did she approach you?" "No. She looked like she wanted to but didn't." I approached her. I sat down, my legs suddenly weak. "What did you say?" I asked if she'd learned anything. She said she'd learned she'd thrown away the most important thing in her life because she was too afraid and selfish to try. I asked if she expected forgiveness. She said no. She said she just wanted me to know that I turned out exactly as extraordinary as she should have known I'd be. Tears filled my eyes. "What did you say?" I said thank you for the apology. And then I left. That's it. That's enough. She acknowledged reality. I acknowledged her acknowledgement. There's no relationship to rebuild. But there's clarity now. Ethan sat beside me on the couch, closer than he usually sat. "She asked about you. I told her you're the best parent anyone could have. She said she knew. She said giving me to you was the only good decision she'd made. Do you think she means it?" "Yes. People don't usually volunteer at autism centers for 3 years after their community service ends unless something genuine has shifted. She's different than she was. Not redeemed. Just different." We sat in silence for a while. Then Ethan said something surprising. "I don't forgive her. But I don't hate her either. She's just someone who made catastrophic choices and is living with consequences. She's become irrelevant to my emotional landscape. And that feels right." I understood. Forgiveness wasn't mandatory. Indifference was its own kind of peace. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Yes." Seeing her confirmed what I already knew. The person who raises you matters infinitely more than the person who births you. Biology is incidental. Choice is everything. That night, I lay in bed thinking about the journey we'd taken. From that terrified 5-year-old on my doorstep to the confident 19-year-old who'd just faced his past without flinching. He'd grown into someone extraordinary. Not because he was autistic. Not despite being autistic. Just because he was Ethan. The next morning brought news that shifted everything again. Ethan's communication system had been acquired by a major technology company for $18 million. His second major sale. At 19 years old, he'd become one of the youngest self-made multimillionaires in the country. The media attention was overwhelming. Every outlet wanted interviews. Ethan declined almost all of them, but agreed to one condition. He'd do a joint interview with me. "Why?" I asked, surprised. "Because every story about me leaves you out. You're not a footnote. You're the primary factor. Without you, there's no story. I want that documented." The interview aired on a major network. The journalist asked about his success, his autism, his innovations. But Ethan redirected every question to focus on support systems, on access to therapy, on the critical importance of adults who don't give up on autistic children. "You talk a lot about your grandmother," the journalist said. "Tell us about her." Ethan looked directly at the camera with that intense focus he brought to everything. At 63 years old, she took in a child who couldn't speak, couldn't tolerate touch, and couldn't regulate his emotions. She learned everything about autism, so she could help me. She fought school systems for appropriate accommodations. She spent thousands of hours in therapy waiting rooms. She structured her entire life around my needs without ever making me feel like a burden. Every success I've achieved exists because she gave me a foundation of safety and acceptance. I didn't succeed despite my autism. I succeeded because she never treated my autism like something that needed to be cured. The journalist turned to me. "Ms. Harrison, did you know when you took Ethan in that he'd become this successful?" "No," I said honestly. "I just knew he needed someone who wouldn't give up on him." Success was never the goal. The goal was helping him feel safe enough to become whoever he was meant to be. Do you feel proud? Every single day. Not because of his achievements, though those are remarkable. I'm proud because he's kind. Because he uses his success to help others. Because he's become someone who makes the world better for people like him. The interview ended with Ethan saying something that became a widely quoted soundbite. "Autistic people don't need to be fixed. We need to be accepted. The world calls us disordered, but maybe the world's expectations are what's disordered. Maybe different brains are exactly what humanity needs." After it aired, thousands of messages poured in. Parents of autistic children, autistic adults, educators, people thanking us for challenging narratives that treated autism as tragedy. One message particularly struck me. It was from a mother who'd just received her son's autism diagnosis and was terrified. She wrote, "Your interview gave me hope. I've been grieving the child I thought I'd have. But you showed me I can celebrate the child I have. Thank you for teaching me that different isn't less." I showed it to Ethan. He read it carefully, then said, "That's why I wanted you in the interview. Parents need to hear from parents who chose acceptance. I can explain my perspective, but you can explain what it looks like to love an autistic child unconditionally. That's what changes outcomes." He was right. The most powerful advocacy wasn't from autistic people explaining their experiences, though that was critical. It was also from parents who'd rejected the tragedy narrative and embraced their children fully. Over the next year, Ethan expanded his businesses further. He launched a third company focused on creating accessible technology for people with various disabilities. He hired occupational therapists, disabled engineers, and accessibility consultants. Every product was designed by people who actually lived with the disabilities they were accommodating. "Nothing about us without us," he explained when I asked about his hiring philosophy. Non-disabled people can't design for disabilities they don't experience. That's why most accessibility features fail. They're designed by people guessing instead of people knowing. The company was successful immediately. Turns out when you design for actual disabled people instead of able-bodied people's assumptions about disability, you create products that actually work. Meanwhile, Ethan started speaking more publicly, but only about topics he cared about. Employment discrimination against autistic adults, the harm of applied behavior analysis therapy that treats autism like a behavior problem, the importance of presuming competence, the need for acceptance rather than awareness. He became an unexpected voice in autism advocacy. Unexpected because he wasn't emotional or inspirational. He was blunt, data-driven, and unwilling to make neurotypical audiences comfortable. He told truths that were hard to hear. At one conference, someone asked if he'd cure his autism if he could. His answer went viral. "No, my autism isn't a disease. It's how my brain works. Asking if I'd cure it is like asking if I'd cure being left-handed or having brown eyes. It's a fundamental part of who I am. The better question is, would you cure your prejudice against people whose brains work differently than yours?" That kind of direct challenge made some people uncomfortable, but it made autistic people feel seen. One young autistic teenager sent him a message that he read to me one evening. "I've spent my whole life trying to act normal. Your speech made me realize normal is a cage. Thank you for showing me I can just be myself." "That's the message that matters," Ethan said quietly. "If one person stops masking because of something I said, if one person accepts themselves instead of trying to be someone they're not, then speaking publicly is worth the discomfort." As we approached the 5-year anniversary of the trial, I reflected on how much had changed. Ethan was 21 now, running multiple successful companies, employing nearly 100 people, and changing the landscape of accessibility technology. And Rachel? She'd completed her community service years ago, but she still volunteered at the Autism Center twice a week. She'd become a parent mentor, helping families navigate early diagnosis. According to Caroline, she was genuinely good at it. She tells her story, Caroline explained during one of our calls. The whole thing. Abandoning Ethan, the fraud, the trial, everything. She doesn't hide her past. She uses it to help parents understand what happens when fear drives decisions. She tells them that loving an autistic child isn't about changing the child. It's about changing yourself. Has she asked about him? I said, still unable to stop asking even after all these years. Only once. She asked if he was happy. I told her I couldn't share information. She said that was right, and she hoped the answer was yes. I thought about telling Ethan, but decided this one conversation could stay private. He'd built a life where Rachel's existence didn't matter. But then something unexpected happened. Ethan came home one evening and said, "I'm considering reaching out to Rachel." I nearly dropped the dish I was washing. Why? Because I'm writing a book about autism, family, and acceptance. I want to include her perspective. Not to reconcile, but for completeness. Her choices shaped my life as much as yours did, just in opposite ways. Her absence taught me who I didn't want to be. Your presence taught me who I could become. Both are part of the story. Are you sure you're ready for that? I'm not ready for a relationship, but I'm ready for a conversation. There's a difference. The meeting happened 2 weeks later at a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop, with Caroline present as mediator. Ethan asked if I wanted to attend. I declined. This was his journey, not mine. When he returned home 3 hours later, he looked tired but steady. How was it? I asked carefully. Informative. She's different than I expected. More genuine. She didn't make excuses. She didn't ask for anything. She just answered my questions honestly. What did you ask? Why she abandoned me. What she was afraid of. When she realized she'd made a mistake. What changed? She said she was terrified of my autism because she didn't understand it. She saw me as broken and herself as incapable. By the time she realized neither was true, she believed it was too late to undo the damage. She said she didn't come back for 11 years not because she didn't care, but because she convinced herself I was better off without her. Do you believe that? Yes. It's consistent with avoidance behavior. She didn't come back initially because returning would force her to confront what she'd done. The fraud happened later, when money became a motivation strong enough to override guilt. But the initial abandonment was fear-based, not malice-based. Does that change how you feel? Not significantly. Understanding motivation doesn't excuse impact, but it provides context. She was 23, unsupported, and completely unprepared. That doesn't justify abandonment, but it explains it. What happens now? Nothing. We had our conversation. I have the information I needed for the book. She has confirmation that I'm okay. That's sufficient. But it wasn't quite the end. 3 months later, Rachel sent a letter. Not to Ethan, but to me. It arrived with no return address, just a postmark from across the state. I debated opening it, but curiosity won. The letter was handwritten, several pages long. It started simply, "Dear Vivian, I know I have no right to contact you. I know you have every reason to hate me. But I need to say things I should have said years ago, and I need to say them to you, not Ethan. Because the person I wronged most wasn't him. It was you." The letter continued. Rachel didn't make excuses. She simply acknowledged reality. She wrote about the weight I'd carried, the sacrifices I'd made, the life I'd restructured to raise a child she'd thrown away. She wrote about watching from a distance as Ethan succeeded, knowing she had no claim to any of it. "You gave him everything I should have given him," she wrote. "You loved him the way I should have loved him. You fought for him when I ran away. Every good thing in his life exists because you stayed. I can't undo what I did. I can't earn forgiveness. But I needed you to know that I understand now what I destroyed. Not just my relationship with Ethan, but your right to a peaceful retirement. Your right to rest after a lifetime of teaching. I stole that from you by dumping my responsibility on your doorstep." The letter ended with, "Thank you for being the mother I wasn't. Thank you for raising a man who changes the world. And thank you for not destroying him by telling him how much I didn't deserve him. You protected him even from the truth of how badly I failed. That's love I'll never comprehend. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Then I showed it to Ethan. He read it silently, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he set it down carefully. She's right about most of it, he said. But wrong about one thing. What? You didn't sacrifice. You chose. Those are different things. Sacrifice implies loss. You didn't lose anything by raising me. You gained a purpose that mattered. She frames it like you suffered. But you've told me countless times that raising me was the best decision you ever made. He was right. I hadn't suffered. I'd lived. Fully and with purpose. Should I respond to her? I asked. Only if you want to. Don't feel obligated. Her guilt doesn't require your absolution. I thought about it for days. Finally, I wrote back. Not a long letter. Just a few paragraphs. Rachel, I received your letter. I appreciate your honesty. You're right that you made catastrophic choices. But you're wrong that I sacrificed. Raising Ethan was the greatest privilege of my life. He didn't take anything from me. He gave me purpose, love, and meaning. I don't forgive you for abandoning him. But I don't hate you either. You're simply someone who made different choices than I would have. The consequence is that you missed knowing an extraordinary person. That's your loss, not mine. I hope you continue helping families. Perhaps preventing others from making your mistakes is how you make peace with your past. But don't contact me again. This letter is my closure. You don't get to be part of our lives, even peripherally. Goodbye, Vivian. I sent it without overthinking. Then I put Rachel out of my mind for the last time. Ethan's book published 6 months later. It was titled Documented Truth, Autism, Acceptance, and What It Means to Be Chosen. It became an instant bestseller, not because it was inspirational, but because it was honest. He wrote about his childhood, his autism, his abandonment, the trial, and his companies. But the heart of the book was about me, about the small daily acts of accommodation and acceptance that allowed him to thrive, about how profound love looks less like grand gestures and more like learning to make the same breakfast every day for 11 years, because consistency equals safety. The dedication read, "To Vivian, who chose me when biology didn't. Everything I am exists because you stayed." The book sparked conversations everywhere. Autism organizations used it in parent training. Educators assigned it in special education courses. Autistic adults called it the first mainstream book that treated autism as difference rather than deficit. And families like ours, families built by choice rather than biology, found validation in our story. One review summarized it perfectly. This isn't a book about overcoming autism. It's a book about accepting it. And in that acceptance, both grandmother and grandson found something more valuable than success. They found each other. Ethan did speaking tours for the book. I accompanied him to some events. At one particular talk, a young woman approached us afterward, crying. "I'm autistic," she said. "I've spent my whole life thinking I was broken. Your book made me realize I'm not defective. I'm just different. Thank you for writing what I needed to hear." Ethan responded in his characteristically direct way. "You were never broken. The systems that failed to accommodate you were broken. Don't confuse systemic failure with personal deficit." She hugged him. He stiffened but allowed it, because he understood that sometimes people needed physical connection to express what words couldn't hold. As we drove home that night, Ethan said something that surprised me. "I understand now why you became a teacher." "Why is that?" "Because changing one person's understanding of themselves changes their entire trajectory. That woman spent years believing she was broken. Now she doesn't. That's more valuable than any software I could build. You did that for 37 years. You changed hundreds of trajectories. I'm only just beginning to understand the magnitude of that impact." "You're changing trajectories too," I said. "Every person you employ who was told they were unemployable. Every family who reads your book and stops trying to fix their autistic child. Every teenager who hears you speak and realizes they don't have to mask. That's changing lives. We're doing it together," he said. "You taught me that acceptance creates possibility. Now I'm teaching others what you taught me." It was true. Everything Ethan built, every word he spoke publicly, every employee he hired, came back to the foundation I'd provided. Not because I was exceptional, but because I'd chosen to accept rather than fix, to accommodate rather than change, to love what was rather than mourn what wasn't. That's all any child needs. Autistic or not. Acceptance first. Everything else follows. As Ethan approached his 22nd birthday, his companies had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. His verification software was now international. His communication system was used in 47 countries. His accessibility technology company had partnerships with major manufacturers. But he still came home for dinner every evening. Still ate the same foods he'd eaten since childhood. Still needed his routines and predictability. Success hadn't changed his needs. It had just given him resources to meet those needs while building something meaningful. One evening over dinner, he said, "I want to establish a foundation." "For what?" "Supporting grandparents raising autistic grandchildren. There are thousands of people in your position. They take in children no one else will care for. They learn about autism late in life. They sacrifice retirement plans to provide stability. But there's almost no support infrastructure for them. I want to change that." "That's a beautiful idea. It's practical. Grandparent caregivers have different needs than parent caregivers. They're older. They have health issues. They're on fixed incomes. They need respite care, financial assistance, updated training on autism support. I can fund that." Within 6 months, the foundation launched. The Vivian Harrison Foundation for Grandparent Caregivers. I argued against using my name. Ethan insisted. "You represent what the foundation supports," he said. "People need to know that aging adults can successfully raise autistic children. Your name signals that." The foundation provided grants, respite care, educational resources, and legal support to grandparents raising autistic grandchildren. Within the first year, it helped 300 families. By the second year, that number tripled. I volunteered, of course. I met with families, shared our story, offered practical advice. Some grandparents were overwhelmed and desperate. Others were thriving but needed community. All of them needed to hear from someone who'd walked their path successfully. One grandmother told me, "I thought my life was over when my daughter dropped off my grandson. I thought I was too old, too tired, too unprepared. But your story gave me hope. If you could do it, maybe I could too." "You can," I told her. "Not because it's easy, but because love creates capacity we didn't know we had." Meanwhile, Rachel's story reached an unexpected conclusion. She'd continued volunteering at the Autism Center, but she also started speaking publicly about her experience. Not to gain sympathy, but to warn other parents against making her mistakes. She spoke at parenting conferences, always starting with, "I'm going to tell you about the worst decision I ever made." Then she'd describe abandoning Ethan, the trial, the consequences. She'd explain how fear and selfishness destroyed her relationship with her son. And she'd beg parents to choose differently. "Your autistic child isn't broken," she'd say. "I thought my son was broken. He wasn't. I was. And by the time I realized that, I'd lost him forever. Don't be me. Love your child enough to learn what they need instead of running from what you don't understand." Caroline called me occasionally to share updates. "She's helping people," Caroline said. "Parents who are on the edge of giving up hear her story and choose to stay. She's probably saved a dozen families from fracturing." Does she ever mention wanting contact with Ethan? Never. She's accepted that she doesn't get that. She tells people her consequence is permanent estrangement from an extraordinary young man. She says that's appropriate. I didn't know how to feel about Rachel's redemption arc. Part of me wanted her to suffer forever. But the teacher in me recognized growth when I saw it. She'd become someone who prevented others from making her mistakes. That had value, even if it didn't earn her forgiveness. When I mentioned these conversations to Ethan, he processed the information without visible emotion. Her growth is statistically interesting but personally irrelevant. She's contributing positively to the autism community. That's good for the community. It doesn't change our relationship, which is non-existent. Are you truly okay with that? Yes. Some people believe family requires reconciliation. I don't. She's my biological mother. That's a genetic fact, not an emotional bond. You're my actual mother because you functioned as one. Biology doesn't create obligation. His clarity was remarkable. No ambivalence. No guilt. Just clear-eyed acceptance that some relationships end permanently, and that's okay. As years passed, that clarity became Ethan's defining characteristic in all his advocacy work. He didn't soften truths to make people comfortable. He stated reality and let people adjust to it. At one conference, a parent asked, "How do I make my autistic son act more normal so he'll have friends?" Ethan's response was blunt. You don't. You teach him to recognize which people are worth his time and which people require him to perform in exchange for conditional acceptance. Real friends accept him as he is. Everyone else is irrelevant. The parent looked shocked. but several autistic adults in the audience applauded. That's what Ethan offered. Validation that being autistic didn't require apology or modification. It required finding people and spaces that accepted autistic existence without demanding change. His companies embodied that philosophy. Every workplace accommodation was standard, not special. Employees could stim openly. Meetings had clear agendas distributed in advance. Communication was direct. Sensory-friendly spaces were available. Different working styles were respected. And productivity soared. Turns out when you stop forcing autistic people to mask and accommodate neurotypical expectations, they have more energy for actual work. Other companies started noticing. Ethan received requests to consult on neurodiversity hiring initiatives. He always said yes, but only if companies committed to genuine accommodation, not performative inclusion. Hiring autistic people doesn't help if you fire them 3 months later for being autistic, he told one CEO. If you're not willing to change your workplace culture, don't waste autistic applicants' time. Some companies rejected his conditions. Others implemented them and discovered what Ethan already knew. Autistic employees weren't problems to be managed. They were assets being underutilized because workplaces were designed around neurotypical assumptions. By the time Ethan turned 25, his impact on employment practices for autistic adults was undeniable. Dozens of companies had adopted his recommendations. Thousands of autistic adults had gained employment in environments that actually worked for them. And the foundation bearing my name had helped over 2,000 grandparent caregivers, providing support that prevented family fracturing and enabled children like Ethan to thrive. One evening, we sat together on the porch watching the sunset. Ethan, now a successful CEO and published author. Me, now 79 years old and somehow busier in retirement than I'd been while teaching. Do you ever regret it? Ethan asked suddenly. Regret what? Taking me in. Your life would have been simpler without me. I looked at him, this extraordinary man who still sometimes struggled with understanding his own worth. Ethan, every meaningful thing in my life came from choosing you. The foundation. The families we've helped. The purpose that kept me vital into my 70s. None of that exists if you don't arrive on my doorstep. Simple isn't better. Meaningful is better. You gave me meaning. He nodded slowly. I couldn't say thank you for a long time. I didn't have the words. But I need you to know that I understood even when I couldn't express it. Every accommodation you made. Every therapy session. Every time you learned something new to help me. I understood it was love. I know you did. Love doesn't require the words, I love you, to be real. It exists in actions. You showed me love in hundreds of ways long before you could verbalize it. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn orange and pink. These quiet moments had always been enough for us. Presence mattered more than conversation. Later that week, Ethan asked if I wanted to attend a ceremony. His verification software company was receiving an innovation award, and he'd been asked to speak. Will you come? He asked. I want you there. Of course. The ceremony was formal, held in a grand hotel ballroom with hundreds of attendees. Ethan accepted his award with characteristic brevity, thanking his team and explaining the technology's applications. Then he said something unexpected. This award recognizes innovation in document verification. But the real innovation wasn't the software. It was what my grandmother taught me 20 years ago when I arrived on her doorstep unable to communicate. She taught me that truth matters. That documentation matters. That evidence matters. She kept every piece of paper, every receipt, every record of our lives together. Not because she knew someday I'd need them, but because she valued accuracy and truth as fundamental principles. He paused, looking directly at me in the audience. I built a system to prove truth because I grew up in a household where truth was never negotiable, where facts mattered more than feelings, where evidence spoke louder than emotion. That foundation came from her. This award belongs to her as much as to me. The audience applauded. I cried, because he was right. Everything he'd built came back to principles I'd instilled without realizing their impact. Accuracy, documentation, truth. Those teacher habits had become his technological innovation. After the ceremony, journalists wanted interviews. Ethan declined most but agreed to one question from a reporter who'd been covering his work for years. Mr. Harrison, your grandmother's influence is obvious throughout your career. What's the most important thing she taught you? Ethan thought for exactly 3 seconds. That love is a verb, not a feeling. Anyone can feel affection. But love is choosing someone consistently, especially when it's difficult. She chose me every day for 20 years. That's what love actually means. The quote appeared in dozens of articles. It resonated with people far beyond the autism community. Because everyone understands the difference between feeling and action, between saying you care and proving it through consistency. That night, Ethan said something he rarely said out loud. I love you, Mom. Mom. Not Grandma. Mom. I love you too, I whispered. The years that followed brought more growth. The foundation expanded internationally. Ethan's companies continued innovating. His book became required reading in education and disability studies programs. But the most meaningful changes were quieter. Autistic adults began contacting Ethan to share how his advocacy had changed their lives. Parents sent messages explaining how his book had transformed their perspective. Grandparents called the foundation in tears, grateful someone finally understood their unique challenges. One letter particularly moved both of us. It came from a 15-year-old autistic girl. Dear Mr. Harrison and Mrs. Harrison, I just finished reading your book. I've spent my whole life thinking something was wrong with me. Everyone at school treats me like I'm broken. Teachers keep trying to fix me. My parents keep apologizing to people for my behavior. But your book taught me I'm not broken. I'm just different. And difference isn't wrong. You gave me permission to stop apologizing for existing. Thank you. You saved my life. We read that letter together. Ethan's expression remained neutral, but I saw his hands tremble slightly. Should I respond? He asked. Yes. She needs to know you heard her. Ethan wrote back that same day. I don't know what he said, but I trust it was exactly what she needed to hear. These moments, these individual lives changed by sharing our story, validated everything we'd been through. The trial, the pain, the years of uncertainty. All of it had meaning because it led to helping others. As I approached my 80th birthday, I started thinking about legacy. What would remain after I was gone? The foundation would continue. Ethan would continue. But I wanted to ensure the principles that had guided our journey were documented beyond our story. So I started writing. Not a book like Ethan's, but a guide. A practical manual for grandparents raising autistic grandchildren. I included everything I'd learned. How to navigate therapy systems, how to communicate with schools, how to create sensory-friendly homes, how to build routines, how to teach life skills, how to protect legal rights. But most importantly, I wrote about mindset. About accepting autism as difference rather than deficit. About celebrating small victories. About finding community. About sustaining yourself so you could sustain your grandchild. Ethan helped me format and publish it through his foundation. The Grandparent's Guide to Raising Autistic Grandchildren. Practical wisdom from someone who's been there. It wasn't a bestseller like Ethan's book. But it didn't need to be. It reached the exact audience that needed it. Aging adults suddenly responsible for complex care needs, feeling overwhelmed and unprepared. The messages from readers confirmed its value. Grandparents wrote to thank me for normalizing their struggles, for providing practical solutions, for reminding them they weren't alone. One grandmother sent a particularly moving message. I thought I was failing my grandson because everything felt so hard. Your book helped me understand that hard doesn't mean wrong, that difficulty doesn't equal failure. You gave me permission to be imperfect while still being exactly what my grandson needs. Thank you for your honesty. That was my goal. Not to present our story as perfect, but to present it as real. With struggles and mistakes and uncertainty. But also with love and persistence and eventual success. As Ethan's 27th birthday approached, we reflected on how far we'd come. From that doorstep moment 22 years ago to this place of stability, success, and purpose. Do you remember that first day? I asked him over breakfast, the same breakfast we'd eaten thousands of times. Yes, I remember being overwhelmed by everything. Too many sounds, too many smells, too much newness. I remember you spoke quietly and moved slowly. You gave me space. That's the first time I felt safe after my mother left. I didn't know what I was doing. I just tried not to make things worse. That's exactly what I needed. Not someone trying to fix me. Just someone not making things worse. You gave me space to regulate, to adjust, to eventually trust. That's the most important thing you did. What would you tell other families in our situation? He considered the question carefully. Don't force connection. Let autistic children come to you when they're ready. Consistency matters more than affection. Acceptance matters more than understanding. You don't have to comprehend why something matters to someone. You just have to respect that it does. Simple wisdom, but profound. Later that day, Ethan showed me his latest project. A documentary about grandparent caregivers, featuring our story and 10 other families. He'd been working on it for over a year, interviewing grandparents across the country. Why a documentary? I asked. Because people don't read statistics. But they'll watch stories. This makes the issue visible. It shows that thousands of grandparents are raising grandchildren with complex needs, often without support. If people see it, maybe they'll fund it. The documentary premiered at a film festival 6 months later. It won awards for short documentary and social impact. But more importantly, it sparked policy conversations. Legislators started discussing support programs for grandparent caregivers. Funding initiatives were proposed. The issue that had been invisible became visible. And our foundation was positioned to receive and distribute those resources when they materialized. Everything Ethan built was strategic, designed not for personal benefit but for systemic change. Watching him work, I understood that the boy who'd needed systems and structure had grown into a man who built systems and structures for others. His autism hadn't been overcome. It had been channeled. His need for order had become a gift for creating order in chaotic systems. At the documentary premiere, a journalist asked Ethan what advice he'd give his 5-year-old self. Nothing, he said. That child was exactly who he needed to be. He survived by being himself. Changing him would have broken him. I'd tell the adults around him to change instead, to learn what he needed rather than forcing him to need what they wanted to give. The journalist turned to me. And you, Mrs. Harrison? What would you tell your 63-year-old self? Trust yourself. You're more capable than you think. That terrified little boy on your doorstep will become someone extraordinary. Not despite his autism. Not because you fix him, but because you accept him completely and give him space to become whoever he's meant to be. After the premiere, families crowded around us, sharing their stories. Grandparents raising autistic grandchildren. Parents of autistic children. Autistic adults who saw themselves in Ethan's story. Everyone searching for connection, for validation, for proof that their struggles had purpose. We stayed for hours listening and encouraging. Because this was the real work. Not the awards or the media attention, but the individual connections that reminded people they weren't alone. Driving home that night, Ethan said, "This is what the money was for." What do you mean? The $3.2 million from the first software sale. The $18 million from the second. I didn't need that money for myself. I needed it for this. For the foundation. For the documentary. For creating change. Rachel came back because she thought money meant wealth. But money is only useful if it means impact. That's what you taught me. I thought about that. I'd never explicitly taught him that money meant responsibility. But I'd modeled it my entire career, stretching my teacher's salary to help students who needed supplies, to fund classroom resources, to support kids whose families couldn't afford field trips. He'd watched me treat resources as tools for helping others. And he'd internalized that completely. "You're a better person than I ever was," I said. "No, I'm exactly the person you taught me to be." As we pulled into our driveway, the home where Ethan had lived for 22 years, where routines had created safety and safety had created growth, I felt overwhelming gratitude. Not for the success, but for the journey, for the privilege of raising this remarkable human, for the purpose it had given my later years, for the countless lives we'd touched by sharing our story, for the proof that love, real love, creates possibility that fear never could. That night, Ethan wrote a social media post that went viral within hours. It said simply, 22 years ago, my biological mother left me on a doorstep because I was autistic. 22 years ago, my actual mother opened that door and chose me. Biology determines who births you. Choice determines who raises you. Choose carefully. And if you're lucky enough to be chosen by someone extraordinary, spend your life proving their choice was right. Thousands of people shared it. Thousands more commented with their own stories of chosen family, of people who raised them when biology didn't. The comments section became a celebration of every aunt, uncle, grandparent, foster parent, adoptive parent, and family friend who'd stepped in when biological parents stepped out. One comment summarized everything. This is what family actually means. Not DNA, but daily decisions to show up, to love, to stay. Thank you for reminding us what matters. The next morning, I woke to find Ethan in the kitchen making breakfast. My breakfast. The same breakfast I'd made for him thousands of times. "What's this?" I asked, surprised. "Role reversal day. You've been taking care of me for 22 years. Time I returned the favor. He'd made everything exactly right. The same temperature, the same portions, the same placement on the plate. Because he'd been paying attention for 2 decades, learning what I needed the same way I'd learned what he needed. We ate together in comfortable silence, the morning sun streaming through the windows. No words necessary, just presence and understanding, and the deep comfort of being with someone who knows you completely. After breakfast, Ethan handed me an envelope. Don't open it yet. Just keep it. What is it? Instructions. For when I need you to have them. I wanted to press for details, but his tone indicated the conversation was over. So I tucked the envelope away and went about my day. Weeks passed. Life continued its rhythm. Foundation work. Ethan's companies. Quiet evenings at home. The ordinary, extraordinary life we'd built together. Then, 3 months after he'd given me the envelope, Ethan announced he was going on a trip. Where? I asked. Southeast Asia. 6 weeks. I'm meeting with manufacturers about accessibility technology production. I'll be in Thailand, Vietnam, and Singapore. 6 weeks is a long time. I know. That's why I gave you the envelope. Open it while I'm gone. Only if you need it. But it's there. He left the following Tuesday. I drove him to the airport, hugged him goodbye, and watched him disappear into the terminal. At 27 years old, he no longer needed me for daily care. But I missed him anyway. That first evening alone, I pulled out the envelope. Inside was a letter several pages long, written in Ethan's precise handwriting. Mom, it began. I'm writing this because I need you to understand something I struggle to say out loud. You saved my life. Not metaphorically. Literally. If you hadn't opened that door 22 years ago, if you hadn't chosen to learn about autism, if you hadn't fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself, I wouldn't exist. Not as the person I am today. Without you, I'd be institutionalized or dead. That's not dramatic. That's statistical reality for abandoned autistic children. The letter continued for pages. He detailed every sacrifice I'd made that I'd thought he hadn't noticed. Every therapy session I'd sat through. Every school meeting I'd fought in. Every accommodation I'd made to ensure his comfort. Every time I'd chosen his needs over my convenience. You think I didn't see it, he wrote. But I saw everything. I just didn't have the emotional vocabulary to acknowledge it. Now I do. So I'm writing this so you have proof, documented proof, that everything you did mattered. That every small choice accumulated into the life I have now. You didn't just raise me. You built me a foundation so stable that I could build anything on top of it. The letter ended with, I'm going to Asia because you taught me the world is bigger than fear. You taught me that discomfort doesn't equal danger. You gave me the security to explore. So when I'm halfway around the world doing work that matters, know that it's only possible because you made me feel safe enough to be brave. I love you. Not just because you're my mother, but because you're the best person I've ever known. Ethan. I cried reading that letter. Then I read it again. And again. Because he'd put into words what I'd always hoped he felt, but never needed him to say. The envelope also contained a second document. A will. He'd left everything to me, with instructions that upon my death, all assets would fund the foundation perpetually. I don't need generational wealth, a note explained. I need purposeful legacy. The foundation is that legacy. Make sure it survives us both. I called him that night, despite the time difference. He answered on the second ring. You weren't supposed to open that unless you needed it, he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. I needed it. Thank you. For what? For seeing. For remembering. For putting it into words. You documented my entire childhood. I documented my gratitude. Fair exchange. We talked for an hour about his trip, his work, his plans. Normal conversation. But underneath it, a deeper understanding. We'd built something remarkable together. Not just a family, but a partnership that changed lives beyond our own. When Ethan returned 6 weeks later, tanned and energized, he brought stories of factories being redesigned for disabled workers, of accessibility becoming standard rather than specialty, of change rippling outward from principles we'd lived privately. It's working, he said. Everything we've built. It's spreading. Other companies are adopting neurodiversity hiring. Other families are using our model. Other grandparents are finding the foundation. The impact is exponential now. Because you built systems that last beyond you, I said. We built them. Never forget the we. None of this exists without you. And that was the truth. Not false modesty, but genuine recognition that we'd done this together. Me providing foundation. Him building structure. Both essential. Both creating something neither could have built alone. As the years continued, that collaboration deepened. I was now in my 80s, slowing down physically but mentally sharp. Ethan included me in every major decision, valuing my perspective even as he made final calls. The foundation thrived. His companies expanded. The documentary led to policy changes. Our book continued reaching new audiences. And quietly, privately, we lived our lives with the same routines that had always sustained us. Same breakfast. Same evening routine. Same comfortable silences. Success hadn't changed what mattered. It had just given us resources to help others find what we'd found: acceptance, purpose, and chosen family. One evening, sitting on that same porch where we'd had countless quiet moments, Ethan said something that felt like completion. If I could go back and change anything, I wouldn't. Not even the abandonment? No, because that brought me to you. And you're the only parent I ever needed. Rachel gave me DNA. You gave me everything else. If I changed that day, I might not have ended up here. And here is exactly where I belong. I took his hand. He squeezed back. And we sat together as the sun set, two people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and built something beautiful anyway. That's the real story. Not the software sales or the trial or the public success. But this, two people choosing each other every day for 22 years. Building trust. Creating safety. Proving that family isn't biology. Family is showing up. Family is consistency. Family is love demonstrated through 10,000 small acts of care. And in the end, that's all any of us really need. Someone who stays. Someone who sees us completely and chooses us anyway. Someone who proves day after day that we matter. I got that. Ethan got that. And now, thousands of other families are getting it too, because we shared our story. The abandoned autistic boy became a man who changes lives. The retired teacher became a foundation leader who supports thousands. And together, we proved that the most powerful force in the world isn't genius or wealth or success. It's choosing to love someone completely, exactly as they are, and never giving up. That's our story. That's our truth. That's our documented proof that love, real love, is always worth it.